It's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. Coming up, Sara Sharif's killers are sentenced to life in prison. The 10-year-old's father and stepmother are condemned for their campaign of abuse and inconceivable cruelty. The judge said the case starkly demonstrated the dangers of vulnerable children like Sara being homeschooled. Tonight, we'll take a look at the government proposals to introduce more safeguarding for homeschooled children. Also ahead, calls for mandatory face-to-face GP appointments after the death of a woman misdiagnosed over the phone. 33-year-old Laura Barlow died after she was told her liver and bowel cancer was endometriosis during a telephone call with her GP. I'll speak to her husband, Mike, who believes an earlier in-person consultation could have prolonged her life. Plus, a Sky News investigation finds one of the world's most popular video games is being used to draw children into illegal online casinos. And it survived the Blitz, outlived 23 prime ministers, and is still standing tall after 104 years. We'll speak to the owner of what could be Britain's oldest Christmas tree. All that to come, and much more, here on the UK Tonight. The murder of Sara Sharif shocked the country and beyond. The 10-year-old was subjected to utter cruelty in her short life. She was abused for years, hooded, tied up and beaten. Well, today, her killers were sentenced to life in prison for their crimes. The judge condemned them for what he called an almost inconceivable campaign of brutality. Her father, Irfan Sharif, will serve at least 40 years. Her stepmother, a minimum of 33. Their sentencing came on the same day the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill was presented to Parliament, with the proposals aiming to introduce more safeguarding measures around homeschooling, as our social affairs correspondent Becky Johnson reports.
During years of abuse, Sara Sharif was beaten, burned and bitten. When her body was found, she had broken bones and dozens of injuries, including signs of a traumatic blow to her brain. Jailing her father and stepmother, the judge described in harrowing detail the horror they inflicted.
It is no exaggeration to describe the campaign of abuse against Sara as torture.
There was criticism too of the system that allowed her father to remove her from school after teachers had raised concerns.
The pretext of homeschooling was simply a ruse, adopted for wholly selfish purposes, to cover up the abuse to which Sara was subject, and to continue with the abuse beyond the gaze of the authorities.
Sara's death has prompted national outrage and calls for a tightening of the rules on who is allowed to home educate their children. Now, under government plans, there'll be new registers of children not in school, and local authorities could insist that children at risk of abuse attend.
I do the data every year and find the numbers of children who've fallen off school rolls and disappear. This register will mean we know where they are and we can check on them.
This would be a set if there was a hollow 3 squiggly.
Yep.
It says record numbers of children are being homeschooled in England, over 150,000 during the last academic year, including Calvin, whose mother says many parents feel they're left with no choice.
The reason home education is so valuable is it's an escape valve for the children failed by the education system. So many children in home education groups now are there because they've come out of schools, they've got unmet SEN needs.
But it's in classrooms where the first signs of abuse and neglect can be picked up by teachers trained to notice.
We often get confused because school's about education, about teaching children to read, write and count. However, our primary role is to keep children safe, and we have a key role in being the front line in terms of safeguarding our children.
So for children who are at risk, do you think school's the safest place?
The children who are at risk, I think there needs to be proper checks and balances.
The new plan only applies to parents of children known to be vulnerable to abuse. They'll lose their automatic right to homeschool. Instead, they'll have to get permission from their local authority, not the outright ban some had been calling for. Giving councils the final say leaves open the risk that children will still fall through the net. In many cases, when children have come to harm, wrong decisions made by overstretched local authorities have been blamed for the terrible consequences that followed. As Sara Sharif's murderers begin lengthy prison sentences, fears remain she won't be the last child to be failed by the authorities whose job it is to keep children safe. Becky Johnson, Sky News.
Well, as Becky outlined there in her report, the murder of Sara Sharif has raised a series of questions around home education. Joining us now to discuss this is Chair of Home Education Charity, Education Otherwise, Wendy Charles-Warner, and the founder of the Oasis Trust, Steve Chalk. The Oasis Trust includes 53 schools, both primary and secondary. It's a registered charity. And thank you both for joining us this evening. The terrible case of Sara Sharif has put home education in the spotlight. Sara was removed from school under the guise of homeschooling, home education, and she died months later. She was a vulnerable young girl. Wendy, I'll come to you first. The government say that new proposals, new legislation is imminent in this area. What should this legislation look like to safeguard the most vulnerable?
The legislation that's being proposed is something of a sledgehammer to crack a nut. No reasonable person would object to a child on a child protection plan for good reasons being required to have consent to remove from a school. However, this goes too far. It's seeking to require consent simply if a child is being investigated. Now, 78% of referrals do not result in child protection plans. So 78% of those children will have their rights curtailed when social workers say that they do not need to be on a plan.
Wendy, perhaps you could explain that a bit more to people watching at home, because some people may say if a child is under investigation, it is better to be safe than sorry.
Well, that's rather the same as saying that if you are accused of a crime, you are guilty until you are found not guilty, isn't it? And these are children who are referred very often, home educated children or children who want to be home educated are referred, for example, because of poor school attendance. Currently, we have a mental health crisis amongst our children. A lot of children are not attending school because they can't, because of mental health and special needs. So they are then referred to Children's Social Services to ascertain whether or not they need a child protection plan, which would mean they were forced to attend school in a cyclical difficulty, which would actually exacerbate the child's problems. Those are the sort of examples that we see.
Steve, I'll let you respond to what Wendy said there, because there was quite a lot in what she had to say.
Yes, what I would say is I think this is a huge step forward. I understand what Wendy's saying, absolutely. And I know that many children are homeschooled and homeschooled very well indeed. In fact, I've got friends who homeschool their children and I'm always amazed at their capacity to do so. But the reality is, well, is as we just hear in this terrible case of Sara and what became of her, that too many children slip through the net. And we run 54 schools around the country. There are so many children that are persistently absent from schools, and it's so easy for a parent to say, I'm homeschooling them, to get the school off their back. So it's not just children's mental health, it's the mental health of parents as well, who sometimes feel overwhelmed. And rather than the school questioning why the child isn't there, they say, I'm homeschooling, and it pushes everyone away. We've got to safeguard every child in the country. I'm sure that all the issues that Wendy has raised will be thought through carefully as this bill progresses through Parliament and becomes law.
Wendy, I think you had a response there to what Steve had to say.
Yes, absolutely. Firstly, I'm getting increasingly distressed by Sara Sharif's death being attributed to home education. As the judge very clearly said, this child had lifelong abuse. She was abused throughout her long life. She was put into the care of her father by a family court judge, despite the court knowing that he was abusive. She was reported to social services by the school, and social services did not act. And then she was removed from school for a period of 4 months. Home education did not affect that child's life. Her evil family affected her life. And it's really unfair to attribute safeguarding risk to home education when actually there isn't that risk inherent in home education.
So,
Steve, I'll let you pick up on that.
Yeah, so I think that goes to the very heart of the problem. The reality is that very often when a parent tells you, when somebody tells you a child's being home educated, they're not being home educated. There are many, many parents who do a brilliant job at home educating their children, and many organisations like Wendy's that exist in order to support parents doing that. But you need the right parents with the right resources, the right money, the right time, the right qualifications, and the right connections. But I know, and we know, don't we, nationally, there are many children, we don't know where they are. They're ghost children. They're out on an estate. They're being groomed. They're in danger. And nobody's watching out for them. So I really do commend this government. Of course, the last government was going to do the same, at taking a step towards safeguarding all children. There's a lot more that needs to be done. And of course, there are many children out of education, as Wendy said, because their children have educational needs, special educational needs that can't be met at the moment or aren't being met at the moment in terms of the state system. So alongside this, we need to invest in special educational needs, additional needs, make education more inclusive, because what goes first in a child's life is their engagement. And when their engagement in education has gone, their attainment falls apart, and then their attendance falls apart. Kids are out of school for all sorts of reasons, and it all goes under cover, very often, of home education. What Wendy's doing is a fantastic job, but that's not always the case for every child.
Yeah, Wendy, I think you and Steve can both agree on the fact that home education can be used as an excuse by those parents of vulnerable children. Steve referred there to ghost children. Our People and Politics correspondent Nick Martin has done a lot of work on that, on the children that simply disappear from the school system, and they are the most vulnerable. Wendy, does this all speak to the fact that, yes, there is this legislation that the government are promising to improve it, but actually home education itself needs a better structure, better support for those who are genuinely being home educated because the traditional school system cannot meet their needs, whether that's mental health, whether that's SEND?
Home educated families would like some support, but the only support in this bill is advice on education, which is already available free of charge from the charity.
And a lot of schools help with that as well. A lot of schools do support families.
Yes, of course they do. And the expression ghost children is actually quite offensive to families. Our community is not a community of children missing education. There is a big difference between children missing education and home education. You should not be conflating the two.
No, but I think we've tackled that in the terms of that home education can be used as a guise, as it was in the case of Sara Sharif. As Steve has pointed out, it can be used as an excuse, a veil, if you like, for parents. And yes, that is tarnishing the reputation of home education. I think we sort of covered that.
There are very, very, very few cases where this is the case. Every single serious case review that involves a child who has had any connection with home education whatsoever, that child has been well known to children's social services and other agencies. The problem is not that the child is home educated. The problem is that agencies are inadequately supported. Schools don't get the support they need to support children. They're not resourced enough to support special needs children. They're not funded enough. The rise in special needs has not been met by a rise in funding.
But I think what we're talking about here, Wendy, I'll let Steve come in. I think what we're talking about here, Steve and Wendy, is the fact, home education it is so easy to take a child out of school and say they're being educated at home. So they disappear from that safeguarding aspect that can often be found at school. Wendy, you're shaking your head. I mean, Steve, what is it you're seeing that Wendy isn't in this argument?
Yeah, well, I absolutely agree with Wendy. Where good quality home education is happening for a child whose needs can't be met in a school system, that's a wonderful thing. That is a wonderful thing. But the reality of the issue is this. There are many, not a few, many children who are out of school whose parents and others will say this is home education, and they're masking the fact that they're not equipped, they're not ready, they're not there very often, and their children are on a stage. And though Wendy shakes her head, the reality is the last time I talked to a young man who found himself in this situation and ended up in with a custodial sentence for using a knife was this afternoon.
OK.
Actually, if I can come back on that, my own
Just briefly, Wendy, because we are running out of time, but yes, I would like you to respond to that.
I can come back on that very readily on 2 points. Firstly, my own research indicates that school children aged 10 to 17 are 20 times more likely to commit an offence leading to a disposal than a home-educated child is. 20 times as likely. And every child that is withdrawn from school to be home-educated, the local authority is notified, and the local authority has the right already to make an inquiry of the parents and to ascertain whether the education is suitable. Fund them properly, and they will be able to do that well.
Yeah. The problem is many children are out of school and they're not being home educated, even though that term is used.
Listen, we have run out of time. We have run out of time, but I can promise you this. I can feel a UK Tonight special coming on home education, because this is clearly an issue. You're both seeing two different forms of reality. Obviously, Wendy, you're immersed in that world of home education. Steve, you're seeing it from the school point of view and what happens to the children that disappear from primary and secondary schools. We will revisit this. Thank you so much for tonight. We've run out of time. That's always the way when it's such a hot topic of debate. Wendy Charles-Warner there, chair of home education charity Education Otherwise, and Steve Chalk, founder of the Oasis Trust that includes 53 schools. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, more to come on that, I am sure. Now, postmasters who fell foul of the post office accounting software Capture, they are going to be offered compensation by the government, it was announced today. Ministers have recognised that the system, which came before Horizon, could have created accounting shortfalls for members of staff who used it. In an exclusive interview with Sky News, Post Office Minister Gareth Thomas said his department is committed to providing redress as quickly as possible. Sky's business correspondent Adele Robinson sat down with him.
My wife fought all her life until it has, until she died.
This is about a scandal before the scandal. Capture victims among the oldest to suffer at the hands of the Post Office.
Happy days.
Ken's wife, June, was sued after being accused of stealing in the 90s. Now the government's promised compensation for victims, but not automatic exoneration.
What do you want to happen?
I want June to be exonerated. And I'll do my best until she is. I'll fight until the end.
How much does it mean to you?
The world. The world.
Capture software was used in the 90s before Horizon, which led to hundreds of wrongful convictions. A report concluded it was likely Capture also created false accounts. Speaking exclusively to Sky News, the Post Office Minister said there was a responsibility to work fast.
Well, the first stage is to work with the Criminal Cases Review Commission. It's the reason why we've asked the Post Office to go through all its records to try and help us understand, firstly, how many people were affected in total by using Capture software, and also to try and understand how many people were then convicted.
While the government's promised justice, those convicted aren't eligible for redress. And that's the challenge for the government, because the capture victims have been waiting even longer than the Post Office Horizon ones. Earlier this year, legislation was introduced to automatically quash Horizon convictions, but that was supposed to be a one-off. Behind the scenes, it's likely the judiciary will be pushing back.
Why does one group of people get legislative help to be exonerated and another doesn't, when it's the same problem?
Chris, whose mum was jailed after using capture, says it should be treated as an extension of the Post Office scandal.
I'm now sort of fighting on beyond the life of my mum and my dad. It would have been so nice to be able to tell them both, you know, we fixed it. And, you know, we didn't get that chance.
Those waiting now want an apology, but are also hoping history doesn't repeat itself for more victims of the Post Office. Adele Robinson, Sky News.
A lawyer accused of working for the Chinese government by MI5 has lost her legal challenge against the agency. The security service warned MPs in January 2022 it believed Christine Lee had engaged in political interference and activities for a branch of the Chinese Communist Party. Well, our correspondent Ashna Hernag is here with me with more details. Ashna.
Well, about almost 3 years ago now, the MI5 suspected Christine Lee of being a Chinese agent. At the time, she was working for a number of members of parliament, lobbying them, building trade links and so on. But concerns started to arise when she donated £500,000 to former Labour MP Barry Gardner. At the time, he was the chairman of the Chinese in Britain All-Party Parliamentary Group. Ms Lee at the time was accused of espionage by the security service. They said that that money had been provided by foreign nationals, and they believed that she'd engaged in political interference and activities for the Chinese Communist Party. Now, that happened, crucially, the timing in all of this, the day after, if we're casting our minds back, former Prime Minister Boris Johnson apologised to MPs over the Partygate scandal. Ms Lee at the time, that she said that this warning about her that came the day after was helpful timing, she said, for political purpose, and therefore she brought legal action against the security service. That today has been dismissed by judges in the Investigatory Powers Tribunal, saying that the MI5 at the time had issued that warning for legitimate reasons. Ms Lee, in previous hearings, has strenuously denied all the allegations against her. But this news coming crucially off the back of yesterday, the alleged spy Yang Tembo being named for the first time publicly. It is now, though, in Ms Lee's case, up for the government to decide whether she's allowed to remain in the UK or not.
OK, Ashna, thank you. Ashna Hernag with the details on that story tonight. Thank you. Still to come here on the programme, the campaign for mandatory face-to-face GP appointments. We hear from a man who's lost his wife to cancer after she was misdiagnosed over the phone. Also ahead, the illegal online casinos using a video game to draw children into gambling. And coming up in sport, after 20 years at the club, Marcus Rashford has admitted to Sky that he's ready to leave Manchester United.
We've come to one of Moscow's Cold War bunkers. It was built as a top-secret command centre.
Being here really feels like you're stepping back in time. I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
A show of military might and menace.
Courage, bravery and sacrifice will win the day.
It's a new subject. They'll learn about combat drones and some how to handle a Kalashnikov.
The Kremlin continues to put forward its own version of events, both present and past.
There's no mention of the fact that Russia invaded its neighbour. That's rewriting history, isn't it?
Now we have to read it carefully.
Vladimir Putin put forward his plan for a ceasefire in Ukraine, telling Kiev, pull out of your eastern territories and the war will end. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Vladimir Putin is already the Kremlin's longest-serving leader since Stalin. The question is, what will a fifth Putin term mean for Russia and the world?
Why do you support Vladimir Putin, Mr. Segal?
I can't answer questions that stupid.
I've watched Vladimir Putin attempt to create a new world order.
The St. Petersburg Economic Forum was the backdrop to Vladimir Putin's latest verbal volley. that Russia could send missiles to other nations to target the West.
Ambassador, I wonder, shall we have a quick word for Sky News?
Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine?
Swedish media, oh my God, you're not afraid of being here.
American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display.
Russia says Evan Gershkovich was caught red-handed, but has never produced any evidence to back that up. Sky News. Get the full story first.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Next tonight, I want to talk about GP appointments. According to the latest NHS data, almost a quarter of all appointments are now carried out on the phone, with around 1 in 20 happening online. This move to remote consultations took off during the pandemic, and it seems to have stuck around ever since. But my next guest is campaigning to change that. Mike Barlow is calling for mandatory face-to-face GP appointments following the death of his wife, Laura. Laura died after her liver and bowel cancer was misdiagnosed as endometriosis during a telephone call with her GP in October 2023. After finally receiving a cancer diagnosis in mid-January, the mother of 3 died just a month later. I sat down with Mike and started by asking him about his memories of Laura.
Laura, when I first met Laura, it was like over 4 years ago at work. It was just a smile. I always say the smile what got me. And we had a chat, we were talking, and it was that bubbly person. And also a dairy person. She used to dare me do this, do that. And me, I'd done it. And we just got on, we hit it on.
And you only got married last year?
Yeah, we got married, so we had a couple of girls. And I proposed in the living room, actually. We put banners up, she was out with a 10-year-old daughter, Bellamia. She helped me, and she come and then proposed, and we got married last year.
Got married in the April of that year.
Yeah, we brought our family down from Manchester.
And it was in the October of that year, Laura started to feel quite unwell.
Yeah, in the end of October, she started having some pains and blood in the stool. She phoned the doctors, her own surgery in Stickney, and mentioned, can she see the doctor? They diagnosed over the phone with endometriosis and said they will refer her to gynae. I went down to pick up a prescription painkillers they told her to take. Beginning of December, we got a letter from gynae saying appointment will be the end of January.
That was for endometriosis, and I think it's important to rewind back to that phone call because, you know, as many people watching this will know, if you get a GP appointment over the phone, they're very brief.
Yeah, what I didn't know at the time is they've just been diagnosed people over the phone without even asking them face to face.
So she was given a referral to the gynaecological department at her local hospital for January.
Yeah, the end of January.
You went through Christmas, but Laura's pain got worse. She actually didn't make it to that scheduled appointment.
Before Christmas, she got poorly. Around about 15th of December, work phoned me up and said, your wife's poorly, could you pick her up? I picked her up, took her straight down to the surgery. No one was in the waiting room. I left my wife in the car, went in, and I said, look, my wife's poorly, could you get a doctor?
This was at the GP surgery?
Same GP, whereas the woman on desk went to see a doctor, come back and said, doctor said, go to urgent care, even though no one was in the waiting room. I went to urgent care, took my wife. There was a doctor on the desk because they assess you to see if you need urgent care or A&E. Told him about my wife, how pain, he even seen how much pain she was in. Told him that doctor told us to come here. So we went in, we waited 2 hours, my wife got worse. So I pulled the doctor up and said, look, my wife's getting worse here. She had a look at her and gave her some morphine. We waited another 2 hours. And it was the same doctor who called her out, who's seen her coming in. So we told the doctor all about it, what the doctor diagnosed her with, and he said, there's nothing we can do because your doctor's dealing with you. So we went home. But my wife was doing all right because the morphine's kicked in. She got worse near the end of December. Laura's sister Lisa took her. And they said, come back the 2nd of January because it's shut over New Year ultrasound. So me, my wife and Lisa went on the 2nd of January to see Dr. Ultrasound. He checked her belly and said, oh, we think you need a CT. We had the CT done. By that time, she was getting worse. They gave her morphine. An hour later, they come back and said they found lesions in your liver. We had an MDT meeting on the 2nd of February. This MDT meeting should have been done in the middle of January. They came in and they said to Laura, you've got 95% cancer. There's nothing we can do. Go home and spend time with your kids.
You've gone from a GP phone call in October with pain. You've been told it's one thing. You've got to Christmas, the pain is so bad. You've gone through the urgent care and the A&E system and the scan. I mean, that's no time at all. That's 2 months all up maybe. And then you are sat down and Laura is told that she has cancer and that there is nothing they can do for her. Can you just talk to me about what that is like?
It was bad. When they told us, we were shocked. I phoned Laura's dad up. I phoned her sister up and said, well, with Laura, we even discussed in the car heading what we was going to do about the funeral. We was discussing it. We went to Centre Parks, spent a couple of days with the kids. On the way home, Lisa had the kids. I took my wife home. Halfway on the way home, she started getting worse. So I phoned Laura's dad up and said, could you meet me at the house to help me get Laura in? We got Laura in. And we waited till everyone come to help me get the bed downstairs. We have a dining room. They all helped me. And then a couple of hours later, she was getting worse. We phoned Macmillan up. So they gave us some stuff. And me and Laura lied on the bed. We both fell asleep and they woke me up and said, Laura's gone. And I was asleep. It was so bad.
Do you feel things would have been different if she had had a face-to-face appointment with a GP?
I've always said, is if she had a face-to-face, they would have seen how much pain she was in. They would have referred her. If we had bloods done, middle of November, could we have caught this cancer? I know we would have. Could we have started chemo? Could we had 6 months, a year down the line with my wife, the kid's mum?
This time last year, Laura was unwell, but you were getting ready for Christmas as a family of 5, not knowing it would be your last. What's this Christmas going to be like?
Not looking forward to it. I've got to do it for the kids. Lisa said, do you want to come to our house for Christmas? I said, no, I want to be at home. And they're all coming to the house. Not looking forward to it. I don't want Christmas. I've got to do it for the kids.
You've had support from your local MP, Richard Tice, on this. You have a petition that has over 100,000 signatures to reinstate face-to-face GP appointments as standard, to at least give people the choice, because not everyone will need to see their GP face-to-face. Some people, you know, can talk to their GP over the phone, but you want people to have that choice. What do you want to happen now? What is going to happen now? Because as you said, this is what is keeping you going, doing this in Laura's name.
What I want now is, now the MP's involved, I want him to take it to government. I want these people to know what's happening out there. I want these people to know doctors not going back to normal. I want these people to know getting back to normal. Too many lives are lost. Now, my wife's story will go to Parliament. I want them people to know. I want people to do something about it. I want people to stop people dying. That's my main goal. That's Laura's legacy, to get people back to normal.
Well, in response to our interview, NHS Lincolnshire Integrated Board and Stickney Surgery released a joint statement saying we would again like to offer our deepest condolences to Laura's family. We're unable to comment on individual cases due to patient confidentiality rules, but we'll continue to speak to the family about their concerns as appropriate. All GP practices are contracted to provide face-to-face, telephone and remote consultations. In Lincolnshire, most appointments are delivered face-to-face, whilst patients also benefit from the flexibility and convenience of telephone and online appointments. With me now in the studio, GP Dr. Sonia Adesera. Dr. Adesera, thank you very much for coming in to talk to us about this tonight. It's a very emotional mic there, and you can understand how Laura's families are feeling about this. Mike kept saying to me this phrase, why didn't things get back to normal after the pandemic? Because, you know, anecdotally, a lot of people say before the pandemic, you could go and see your GP face-to-face. Now, it feels like you have to fight to go and see them face-to-face. Why did things not get back to normal, as Mike put it, after the pandemic for people?
Yes. Well, first off, just, you know, my heartfelt condolences to Mike and his family. That was such a really heartbreaking watch. And also, you know, full credit to him for, despite his grief, campaigning to improve the healthcare service for other people. It's you know, really heartwarming that he's doing that. So why has it not got back to normal? I guess we're trying not to go backwards and we're trying to go forwards. So when COVID happened and when the pandemic happened, we had to change the way we did things with remote consultations. We introduced new technology to allow video consultations, text messaging services. And we found that actually many of our patients like that. They like the ease and the convenience of being able to have an appointment, whether that's on the phones, that don't have to take a time off work, or not having to come into the surgery. So for many of our patients, it's easier and it's more convenient to do that. What you said about having to fight for an appointment, you know, that has been a problem actually, I think, pre-COVID. Okay. In the past few years, it's been increasingly difficult. I know this because my patients complain about this every day, to get a GP appointment. And as GPs, we're seeing more and more patients. We're doing more and more consultations over the past few years.
Are you actually seeing more patients because it's
less of us
face-to-face and you're getting in those digital and telephone appointments as well?
Yes, but also secondly, GP numbers have gone, GP practices are closing. So the workload on individual GP practices is increasing. So it's more now than it was, let's say, 10 years ago. So the number of patients and consultations that you're having to see on a daily basis has been increasing over the past few years. So, you know what, I think we have to have a system that allows that patient choice. If a patient wants to have a telephone consultation, that allows that, but also know that for some patients, they want to see a doctor face-to-face.
OK, Dr. Sonia Adesera, I'm just going to have to interrupt you because we've got some breaking news from the United States. Bear with us for just one moment. I just want to bring people watching this evening this news coming from the United States. The breaking news that Luigi Mangione, who has been indicted for the murder of United Health Group Chief Executive Brian Thompson. This has happened in the last few minutes. We can cross now to New York authorities speaking about his indictment. Let's listen in.
Good afternoon. I'm Alvin Bragg, Manhattan District Attorney. I'm honored and privileged to be joined by Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch. First and foremost, I want to extend my deepest condolences to Mr. Thompson's loved ones and colleagues. His family deserves our respect as they continue to grieve. Our work will never be able to undo the fact that a life was lost. We are here to announce that Luigi Mangione, the defendant, is charged with 1 count of murder in the first degree and 2 counts of murder in the second degree, including 1 count of murder in the second degree as an act of terrorism for the brazen, targeted, and premeditated shooting of Brian Thompson, who, as you know, was the CEO of United Healthcare. This case was made possible by the collaborative efforts of the phenomenal public servants you see before you today, and so many others who are not here. I'm honored to lead the Manhattan District Attorney's Office and privileged to serve alongside Assistant District Attorneys Joel Seidman, Kristen Bailey, and Zachary Kaplan, who were working from the outset, hand in hand, with the greatest police department in the world. Chief of our trial division, Lisa Del Pizzo, and the Deputy Chief, Chris Prevost, provided sage oversight and direction. And I want to acknowledge our high technology analysis unit. There was a lot to be processed here. Steve Moran, in particular, who heads that, and Marco Popic. We are privileged here at the DA's office to work every day with the phenomenal public servants at the NYPD. It has been a distinct pleasure to work besides Commissioner Tisch, an exemplary partner, and Chief of Detectives Joseph Kinney. Almost every day we're in touch, and his leadership is second to none. And then Deputy Commissioner Rebecca Weiner, who, as I tell her, there are a lot of challenging things happening in the world, and I sleep better at night knowing that she is the Deputy Commissioner in charge of terrorism. The detectives on this, out doing the courageous frontline work, Detective Oscar Diaz, Detective Curcio, exemplary, the finest. It wasn't just those of us here in New York. I want to acknowledge the great work of our partners in Altoona, the Altoona Police Department, the Blair County District Attorney's Office, the governors of New York and Pennsylvania, the FBI, and of course, the brave members of the public who answered the call when our great commissioner put out the call for their assistance. This was a frightening, well-planned, targeted murder that was intended to cause shock and attention and intimidation. It occurred in one of the most bustling parts of our city, threatening the safety of local residents and tourists alike, commuters and business people just starting out on their day. Let me say a bit more about the charges. They include 1 count of murder in the first degree as a killing in furtherance of terrorism, 2 counts of murder in the second degree, 1 charging that the killing was done as an act of terrorism, and the second pertaining to the fact that the killing was intentional. The maximum penalty possible for murder in the first degree and murder in the second degree as an act of terrorism is life without parole. The maximum penalty for murder in the second degree is 25 years to life. There are additional counts as well. A number of criminal possession of weapon charges, 2 counts in the second degree, 4 counts in the third degree, 1 count in the fourth degree, and a count of criminal possession of a forged instrument in the second degree. Let me tell you a bit about the facts. On November 24th, we allege that the defendant arrived in New York City to murder Brian Thompson. After the defendant arrived in New York City on a bus at Port Authority, he checked into the hostel on the Upper West Side using the name Mark Rosario with a fake New Jersey ID. On the morning of December 4th, the defendant left the hostel, just after 5:30 a.m. and traveled to Midtown. For nearly an hour, we allege the defendant waited in the area near the Hilton Hotel, waiting for Mr. Thompson to appear. From 6:38 a.m. to 6:44 a.m., the defendant stood across from the entrance of the hotel on West 54th Street. When he saw Mr. Thompson, he crossed the street and approached him from behind. We allege he then took out a 9mm 3D printed ghost gun, equipped with a 3D printed suppressor, and shot him once in the back and once in the leg. The defendant then fled northeast on 54th Street and took an e-bike uptown before getting into a taxi that took him to West 178th Street and Amsterdam Avenue. On December 9th, the defendant was spotted at McDonald's in Altoona, Pennsylvania. The local police were notified, he was arrested, and he was found with a 9mm handgun, a suppressor, 2 ammunition magazines, and the same fake New Jersey ID he used at the hostel. I want to say a word about ghost guns. These weapons are increasingly proliferating throughout New York City and the entire country. Involving technology will only make this problem worse. Last year, over 80 ghost guns and ghost gun parts were recovered in Manhattan alone. The NYPD and the Manhattan DA's office have been leading in the interdiction of these ghost guns. And one thing I want to make clear, they're unserialized, they can be printed out, but as this case tragically makes clear, they are just as deadly as traditional firearms. this will remain a priority for us here in Manhattan. Finally, I know there have been questions about the extradition process. The latest that I can offer you is that the defendant is currently scheduled to appear in court in Pennsylvania on Thursday morning, first for a preliminary hearing on his Pennsylvania charges. Immediately to follow that will be an extradition hearing. We have indications that the defendant may waive that hearing, in which case he'd be brought to New York forthwith. In any event, we have been preparing on parallel paths, and before the hearing, we'll send to the governor of the state of New York the paperwork that would be necessary if he does not waive during that hearing.
The Manhattan District Attorney there, Alvin L. Bragg Jr., announcing the indictment of 26-year-old Luigi Mangione for the murder of Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare. He said, "We allege that Luigi Mangione carried out the brazen, targeted and fatal shooting of Brian Thompson in Midtown Manhattan. This type of premeditated, targeted gun violence cannot and will not be tolerated." Let's bring in our US correspondent, James Matthews, who joins me live now and was listening to that announcement, because there were a number of additional counts announced as well.
Hi, Sarah-Jane. Yeah, that's right. Alvin Bragg setting out the charges that a grand jury has been sifting over. That's what they think they can get him on. The top of the list is murder in the first degree. Quite rare in New York. Normally a charge reserved for somebody killing a judge, a police officer in a premeditated way. It also can be a charge levelled if it's thought the perpetrator was acting in the furtherance of terrorism. And that's clearly what they are looking to pin on Luigi Mangione, that charge of murder in the first degree in furtherance of terrorism. That, I imagine, Sarah-Jane, relates probably to the manifesto that he was found in the possession of. That spoke about his discontent with the healthcare industry and an intention to target CEOs within that industry, and details about where to target them and so on. So I think that will be the terrorist element that played into the grand jury's thinking. In terms of a maximum sentence, it won't be the death penalty. New York repealed that in 2004. Maximum sentence, if he's found guilty of murder in the first degree, would be life without parole. Things should happen fairly quickly. A court appearance on Thursday in Pennsylvania, Sarah-Jane. If he doesn't oppose extradition, indications that he won't, then he'll be taken to New York to face the music, and the legal process will kick in properly.
James Matthews following the story for us and this breaking news in Washington. Thank you. Well, let's return to a subject we were talking about just before that breaking news from the United States. With me in the studio, Dr. Sonia Adesera, GP, and we were talking about face-to-face GP appointments following the death of Laura Barlow, a woman misdiagnosed over the phone and later died of cancer. You think that going back to full face-to-face GP appointments will be a step back? We've already heard the new government saying the future of the NHS is to take it from analogue to digital, and this is very much a part of that.
Yeah, of course, because there's many of my patients that want more things to be more online. They want to be able to do consultations from work and not take a day off work. So for many people, having more online services, more telephone consults is easier and more convenient for them. But of course, it doesn't work for everyone. So I have some patients who are not online or who are illiterate, so they need to come in for face-to-face appointments. And sometimes when you have symptoms that are quite severe or complex conditions, or when you have very young patients or elderly patients, or patients that are vulnerable or complex for many different reasons, or just a patient might have a preference that they prefer to speak to someone, then we have to have that option for have a face-to-face appointment.
But it's important to remind people watching that they have the right to ask for a face-to-face consultation. I mean, Laura Barlow's case, we were hearing about it from her husband, Mike, there, diagnosed with endometriosis over the phone. And most women will know nowadays, because we talk about endometriosis a lot more, we know a lot more about it. It can take up to 7 years to diagnose that. So to be diagnosed that over the phone by a GP, alarm bells should have rung. But if you don't know, you don't know. You trust your GP. And You know, a lot of people say, I really want a face-to-face appointment. Should they push it more? If they want one, can they have one?
So you can request a face-to-face appointment if you want one. A review done last year of e-consultations looking at GP surgeries found that actually the majority of people were not requesting face-to-face. They were requesting telephone consult. So we can't take that away from people when many people want that. But of course you can request a face-to-face appointment if you'd like to see your GP, and that's easy for you to have that consultation. And I think
is the accuracy lost with a phone consultation, though?
I think there are definitely things that can be handled over the phone, but there are, you know, you can't examine someone over the phone. You can't take subtle cues like body language over the phone. Some people find it easier to speak on the phone than face to face. They feel like they find being in the surgery
intimidating. You prefer as a GP because it is all about examining patients and talking to them face to face for you.
I think for me, I'm a people person, so I prefer the face-to-face consultations.
And you feel more confident in a diagnosis. I think that's what I'm trying to get at. Is it more beneficial for patients and for GPs to actually be in the same room as someone?
For certain conditions and for certain symptoms, it is easier when you have them in the room because you get the full picture. And also it's just nicer for me as a GP because often when you have the face-to-face consultation, you end up talking about other things as well, whereas the telephone consult is quite clinical and quite, you know, quite stick to the point. And face-to-face, you just get to know your patients better. So personally, I prefer it, but I also understand that for some of my patients do prefer telephone consult. But what you were saying earlier about, you know, getting the diagnosis right, actually, you know, medicine's not a fixed science. And sometimes it can take multiple consultations, multiple investigations until we work out what's going on. Like endometriosis, we can't diagnose that straight away. It's often after investigations that we'll come to that diagnosis. So I guess what I'm saying to your listeners watching this, if you go to your GP and then if you find actually your symptoms are not getting better or your symptoms are changing, don't hesitate to go back. Because, you know, we won't get things right first time and the clinical picture changes. So do go back to your GP if things are not getting any better. But also then to our government, the current state of our general practice is not working for patients or for doctors.
Indeed. OK, Dr. Sonia Adesera, thank you so much for coming in to talk to us about it. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Coming up on the UK Tonight in the sport, after 20 years at the club, Marcus Rashford has admitted to Sky that he is ready to leave Manchester United.
There are dozens of people desperately clambering to get onto that boat. It is a chaotic scene, but it's being watched by dozens of French police officers on the beach. I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels. It's not just homes, but whole streets like this one that have been reduced to rubble. Getting the chance to tell people's stories, it's a privilege.
In politics is at an all-time low. What's going wrong and can we fix it? It's from Liz. She wants to know, why is there still no sign of the Labour Party electing a woman as leader?
It's sort of embarrassing. You know, it takes a very strong man to be leader, but it takes an even stronger man to support a woman for leader.
If you want to be mean to politicians, like, crack on. The activists that go out and make elections happen, I kind of feel like just don't be horrible to them. Be polite to them in the same way that they're polite to you.
Keir Starmer has got us into government with a big majority. He was completely clear before the election that he wasn't going to be able to do the two-child benefit policy, but I wouldn't be surprised if it isn't an early thing that comes along.
I went up to Gordon Brown and said, hello? No, yes, what is it? I said, found all these Tory candidates breaking land. Let me see it. This is brilliant.
I'm Martin Brunt, and I'm Sky's crime correspondent. My most memorable story was, and still is, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
Please, please do not hurt her. Please give our little girl back.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
For detectives, the first 48 hours after a murder are crucial in the search for clues. The public expects them to find Jill Dando's killer soon.
I remember the grimmest case, the Soham murders of schoolgirls Holly and Jessica. I felt I can't undo what's happened, but I can help explain it.
Ian Huntley was arrested and charged within a fortnight of the murders.
My biggest challenge was to persuade a jailed diamond thief to answer my letters. Martin Brunt, Sky News, at the Old Bailey.
It's been a busy show, not much from me. There's been breaking news interrupting this breaking news, but this is massive. Manchester United and Marcus Rashford. Tell us.
Yeah, I mean, actually, this is the clearest indication we've had yet from Marcus Rashford himself that he is looking to move to pastures new. He's given an interview to Henry Winter, formerly of The Times and The Telegraph, as football writers, saying about his time at Manchester United. For me personally, I think I'm ready for a new challenge in the next steps. When I leave, it's going to be no hard feelings. You're not going to have any negative comments from me about Manchester United. That's me as a person. If I know that a situation is already bad, so he's kind of acknowledging that, I'm not going to make it worse. I've seen how other players have left in the past. I don't want to be that person. When I leave, I'll make a statement and it will be from me. So clearly, he is looking ahead to being somewhere else rather than, you know, the last 20 years, as you said, that he's been at Manchester United.
And what do you think that future looks like?
I mean, there will be offers. He's 27,
yeah.
so he's still, you know, young. He's kind of effectively at his peak right now. And there will be clubs, particularly in Spain, I think, and PSG were interested in him a while ago.
Do you think it is a move abroad?
Yes, I think probably.
Yeah.
Although there will be noting certain things, that he hasn't really fitted into Ruben Amorim's squad. He was dropped for the derby. He's had this wide appointment about his application, his attitude, you know, being late for training, having a birthday party just hours after Manchester United lost to Manchester City. So that will be a point that they will obviously mark. But it's clear that maybe the January transfer window might have suddenly got very exciting indeed because of Manchester United potentially selling Marcus Rashford, if he himself is acknowledging he may well be about to leave. Other football stories making the headlines this evening.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
I remember when I first went on trial at under 9, I just couldn't concentrate. There'd be like games going on and I'd be looking over there. I just went off and played club football for a while, went back at under 11s, under 12s. And yeah, I had a lot of ups and downs. There was times where I was 16, you know, when you want to go out and stuff like that. And that's when you truly have to make sacrifices that I found it really difficult. Once I got my feet on the ground and worked hard, then yeah, the journey through the youth team was much easier.
You spent time on loan at Weston-super-Mare. Did the progression from there always seem straightforward?
I always take things, you know, day by day and not look too far ahead. So I was just focusing on progressing and just trying to cement myself in the first team because I didn't see myself as a first-team player then. Yeah, I was just trying to focus on playing, you know, a lot of games and improving. And
this Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
That's all from us. We're back tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. Up next, it's The World with Anna Botting. See you tomorrow.